been a long 2 years or 3 or whatever it is, I lost count. But I appreciate all of you being here, and to get started, I welcome questions. I would love to hear feedback. And I did bring some of my work. Almost all of these are plein air. I started working in my home studio, which is my living room, about the time COVID started, and so I do pastels outdoors. It's also, for me, a medium that is immediate. I think it's the easiest to begin painting with pastels, and I just find that there's so much flexibility, and I love all of these are done outdoors and within a short amount of time. I do like to work indoors larger, but like I said, I'm trying to work outdoors. I think pastel is fairly non-toxic because the biggest problem with it is dust, and it's for that reason I don't work in my studio, which is my home. What else? Let's get started. So I started doing this just as a kind of, I'd like to challenge myself. Sometimes that gives me a lot of trouble. But I started pastels. Well, I've used them all along, but I thought they were therapy paintings. You know, I just had newsprint and pastel, and it got into my nose and everything else. So I guess when I moved here in '93, I discovered them as an art medium, and I just fell in love. I look at pastels, and it's like I'm a kid in a candy store. The color is so exciting to me. But I got these pastels. I asked for a Christmas gift, and I got this nice set. And I had the hardest time painting with them because all I could see was the color. And what I didn't get was the value. And so for me, and you'll see, everything I did was to get the pastels organized so that I could then just pick up a stick like I would mixing paint. And the other thing that kind of threw me at first was the pigment names, because I was used to oil paint and watercolor, and especially before I moved here, watercolor for 14 years. And I learned a lot about the pigments and about how they mix or layer or transparent or not. And in pastel, that's not, it's more subtle, and it's harder to find out exactly what the pigment is. And so it's possible, but it's harder. So, and then the next thing was, there was like this huge influx of new supplies. Different papers, different manufacturers, different everything. Hard, soft, blah, blah, blah. So what I did was organize my pastels, and I was teaching again, and I thought, I want to see if I can use a limited palette in pastel. And so what I ended up doing was, because in oil paint I like burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, especially in the winter. That's like my favorite limited palette. So I picked a piece of color fix that's Art Spectrum paper in a blue haze, kind of it's a light, but a light mid-tone blue gray. And I picked a light, mid-tone, and dark of what I thought was burnt sienna, and a light and a dark of a blue, kind of like ultramarine blue. And I started painting these winter trees, and it was through Artisan when they were up on Canyon Road in Santa Fe. And I stepped out of the studio, and here's these trees, so that's what I painted. And I put something down, and my students go, no, that's too bright for burnt sienna. So I left it and I kept painting. I picked different ones that were more like burnt sienna, and I kept painting, and then I realized that this was it turned out well, and I thought, but that one spot of brighter color was perfect. So I kept that in mind, that you don't have to have 4 million pastels. And I know people that
You don't?
have says, now, you can never have enough. But the main thing is that I had to be able to see the value of the pigments. And and then be able to find a manufacturer or figure it out. So I brought this, I want to pass it around. This is Rembrandt, which is not my favorite pastel, but it's like a really great starter set. And most companies have a way to label them. And this one is 236.9, right? This one is 236.5. That is pure pigment. That's the color. And it has a value. It's light or dark or mid-tone. And so I brought this, and then when it goes down to 0.3, it's tan, right? The yellows kind of go to browns, quote, or tans. So I'm going to pass that around just so you can see. This is a string of values. And Great American, I know, has that. The old Grumbacher, if any of you have I'm going to look on eBay, because they had strings of values. Terry Ludwig also is doing strings of values. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to get started, and then we can talk later, is that this is my little note-taking in there, Terry Ludwig's, except for that one. That one's probably a Sennelier. These are all soft. I'm going to begin my painting with a light. There's actually 4 values of blue, ultramarine blue, I believe, and then a warm yellow. And this one, and I can pass this around if you want. And this is a dark, which when I was in Vermont and Henchy's theory and all of that, they would say, what's the color under the color? So what I discovered is browns and grays tell me nothing. But if I can say this has yellow underneath that color, even though it's at a dark value, and or orange or green, and I then sorted my grays and browns into whatever color hue, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So this is my limited palette, and I decided I wanted to use a new to me color theory that is based on the Munsell color wheel. And maybe this will all come together. But anyway, this is the color wheel that I knew from, teaching high school, right? And especially important is this little row of low-key darks and this little row of light values. Each pigment has a value. I didn't see that until I started working in pastel. And so I brought some if anybody wants to, play with this or look at it. This is the color wheel that is fairly new to me. And it's used more by decorators and paint companies. And it's basically an analogous color scheme with the complement and 2 discords. Robert Burridge, who's the watercolor painter, says these are spice colors. So what I'm going to do is start with the basic complementary color scheme, and I'm going to have the subject I'm doing, which you'll see, and I'll show you too. I've gotten into Adobe and Red Rock. Okay, so I went out to the Diablo Canyon outside of Santa Fe last week and painted. I had gone out with the plein air painters in June or July, I forget, and I'll show you that piece. And then I am doing kind of a series on Diablo Canyon. And so that's what I'm going to work with today. But what I didn't understand, and after kind of playing with this, is first of all the analogous color scheme, which I don't think I've ever used, and more than that, that's my yellows and oranges. This is my complement, which is blue-violet. And what I like about this, if you're an oil painter or if you care to find out what the pigment is in those little chalks, the pigment is listed here. So if I don't have vermilion, I could use cad red, or I could use cad orange. And that helped me a bunch because I relate it to mixing colors. And when I get my pastels, what I want is a piece of paint. I don't want to have to stop and think, and I mix hard and soft. And but my main thing is that, so this is what I'm going to be working with today. The Adobe colors are the major part. That's dominance. That's another one of my things, is dominance. So I want more of the warms. I'm going to use the complement to neutralize my warms and to use for probably shadows. And then this is how I carry my stuff out to paint, and it's like a portfolio. So it's got interleaved, it's Canson paper. You can paint on the Canson, and I brought it so that I could show you this. This is the Canson paper. That's kind of the granddaddy. And it's a laid finish, so there's like little indentations. Now, the purpose is so that you can fill it in with pastel, and you can layer. But I like to work on the back. I like the smoother surface if I'm going to use Canson. But what I love about this is that it's got glassine in between, and I have a bigger one in my backpack. And I'll just put this down if anybody wants to look at it. But it's like the perfect portfolio. And then I just put it in here until I get home. I usually just wait until I have kind of filled it and then take them all out and look. So as you'll notice, I have a lot of 9 by 12s. That's kind of my standard plein air size. But this is handy for a purse. Is anybody interested? I'll send this around too if you're interested in seeing it. And the other ones are here. Any questions, anything? So, because I used to say I was retarded when it came to values, and somebody said, "Oh, that's not correct." So, I'm value challenged. So, anyway, this is, I think I did every medium. I teach all mediums, so each week is a different medium. But this is the pastel I did from last summer. And if any of you have been out to Diablo Canyon, there's like these big, nice rock things, and then you see through. And the second peak was in light. And then last week, this is what it looked like. And so this is my plein air. This is water-based oil. That's what I'm working in my studio now. So I'm going to use this as my inspiration And that's been working really well, to take a subject and revisit it, do it better, different, a different composition. So this is what I'm working from, and this, I wanted to make a dominance of light rock, red rock, and just a small amount of dark, okay? So it's dominantly light, dominantly warm. This is a horizontal composition, and often I will either change mediums or format. So I taped off almost a square on the paper that I'm using. And I decided to use a toned background. And I like to use toned either to get a different color underneath, because that's why I like the color fix. There's so many beautiful colors. Other papers have that too. And or to do a mid-tone so that I can tell, again, I'm value challenged. So if I put down a dark and it doesn't show up on that paper, then I know it's not dark enough. I know it's a mid-tone. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I get contrast right away on a toned paper, especially a mid-tone. I can also use it for a balance of color. A lot of plein air painters, if it's a green subject, they like to go out and put red on their surface or have a red paprika color. There's beautiful colors underneath. Sometimes if I'm doing warm dominance, I'll do a cool tone, like the blue haze. It's usually what I use for red rock. Any questions? So, I have my 6, 7, whatever it is, pastels. And I'm going to start, I like to use vine charcoal. Let me see if I can even find it in here. And the main thing with pastels is that they don't roll around and get dirty that way. So, I have mine sorted into 2 lights, 2 midtones, and 2 darks. But the next thing I do is hue, the color. And most pastel artists that I've seen paint like to put all the blues in one section and all the purples in a section, right? But the problem is you don't get to see how the darks relate to each other. And do I have every pigment in lights and darks? Those are the parts that are missing mostly in sets. So I'm just going to quickly, I'm going to make a dominance of this. This is the rock face that is to the right when you're at Diablo Canyon. Then this is that second, which had a little piece of light on the tip. I don't know if I'll do that. And then there's this other rock face that's all in shadow in the morning. 1, 2, 3, 4. I like to keep it 3 to 5 shapes. Now there is another little bitty one back here in the distance. And I usually start with my darks, and I want a warm dark. Terry Ludwig's were the first pastel that I tried that actually went on darker than it looked. The Rembrandt, the new pastel, they go on lighter, which means to me there's more filler in them. The Terry Ludwig was wonderful. So, and then I'm going to do some darks. There's not a lot of darks, but see, when I put this down, I don't see an edge. it's the same value as the gray. If I put this down next to it, I see a sharp edge. And that's how I organized this, was to try, I kind of visually, this is light and that's dark, and then I just kind of put it into the area. And I keep that piece of paper. If anybody's interested, I'll show you. It takes about an afternoon to sort it. And then after I paint, usually I put my pastels that I'm using like that, or in a little box, like I could use the lid or little something. So I want to go back to my darks. There's some darks. Sorry, I'm going to try and remember to go the other way. There's some darks here. And again, when I paint, I kind of have an order in landscape painting, and it works for other things too. I start with the shapes, and then the next thing I attend to is the values, light and dark. And then the third thing is edges, and the last thing is color. Because color, in the first place, that's, I think, what attracts pastel painters to pastels, is all the color. But how do you organize it? How do you structure it? That was the hard part. So I'm doing shape first. I did my little drawing, and there's dark in here, maybe even darker than that. And when I painted in oils, I did raw under and kind of did a value painting underneath. And then I would add the color on top. Being careful to put the same value on my underpainting. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we've got some cools going on in here, in this shadow part. So basically I'm doing just light and dark here in two colors and about 4 values. Now I know that this is lighter than that darker. And remember, it's a dominant warm, so now once in a while I use the hard pastels and kind of lay in with hard pastels. But more and more, I like to just use the side, the edge. And I'm thinking really in terms of warm and cool, light and dark. I'm going to put a little bit of, and guess what? I have green. A lot of people think you can't mix pastels. And what I found out is pastels show me what's possible, and the mixing part of oil paint and watercolor shows me what I can do with the pastels. Again, you don't need 4 million pastels. You can if you are using the similar values, you're never going to get mud. It's when you mix dark and light that you get midtones and grays.
That was a pretty bright blue, too.
Pardon me?
It was a pretty bright blue that you used.
It was bright blue, yeah. So I think I'm going to go ahead and go to a mid-tone, my mid-tone cool, and go over again. So you can layer and mix, and that's the beauty of this, is that in theory, if I have the right value, any color will work. Now, and I hope to show you that here in a minute. So, so I'm going to go ahead and do this light. This is my lightest blue, and it may not be light enough, but I want to put the light on here. And how do I know that it's light? I've got an edge to my mid-tone gray. So I'm just putting on a layer, and I think I'll go a little darker. One of the things I like to do is change pigments, and I'll show you that in the warms more than, rather than have the same color all the way across. I like to, and if it's not light enough, let me see if I can, these are warm lights. I'm like, where's white? There it is. And I want to keep it clean. I usually have a paper towel to just wipe it, and then at the end wipe it. So I can put on a light over a dark easier with both pastel and oil. So if that blue is not light enough, if I want that sky to be lighter, I just add white. A little more transition would be nice here. So far, this is going to be fun. This is my lightest yellow. And that's a warmer yellow. So now I'm going to look at edges. And I want to make sure I've got the sky lighter than that upright. Now I've forgotten his name. Landscape painting from New England. Anyway. He says that the uprights are the darkest, the three-quarter planes, in other words, those mountains that we see in the... Thank you. I knew you knew it, Carlson. The other one I love is, and I think it's Thomas Cole on trees. These are old books that are just full of information. Anyway, uprights are the darkest, three-quarter planes like the mountains are a little bit lighter, foreground is lighter, and he says the sky is always the lightest thing. However, out here, our sun is so intense, often the ground is lighter than the turquoise sky. So it's like learn the rule and ask yourself, is that true? And how do I know these edges? So I'm going to look here. Now I've got this line here. But what I want to do, and I think I'm going to put a little bit of this color in here. That's getting there. But I want to darken this a little bit so that it's darker than the sky. Any questions? Now remember, I want a dominant warm. I have to keep reminding myself. Have you ever painted vignettes? You know, you're only supposed to touch the edge 1, 2, or 3 places. I go to all 4 edges. It's like if a little's good, a lot's better. Okay, now I'm going to just tap, and this is partly edges. I'm not going to rub really, although I do have some tools like tortillons and stumps and stuff like that, and those, the bubbles from the packing company and the foam that wraps the pipes, and those are all fun too. But I just want to, if I want stroke quality, I'll use some of these. But mainly I want soft edges, so I'm just going to take a paper towel, and it's mainly so I don't rub my skin off and get some softer edges here. Because this is like an underpainting. Maybe it is an underpainting. So that's 2 colors, 2 hues, light, mid-tone, and dark, or maybe 4 values. Now let's have fun with the color. So, any questions, anything?
That's color fix paper, right?
This, I'm not sure.
Oh.
It's gray, it looks like Kitty Wallace, but it doesn't have any markings on it. And people have given me stuff, and I was looking down here, and it's drifting. There's pastel dust in there. And Kitty Wallace, usually I don't get any drift, so it may not be Kitty Wallace. However, I do have some which I like, Horde.
I'm trying to understand, when you said your edges kind of keep you with the lights and darks, and I don't understand that. How that is.
Okay, so what I'm looking at is when 2 colors are right next to each other,
Yeah.
if I squint and I don't see much of an edge, it's about the same value. So when I put it down, when I put this color down on that gray, and I squint, I hardly see it. I don't see an edge. This comes in handy later. If I put this one down, and especially if I put it next to that one, I see a strong edge.
Yeah.
Right? So what I want to do is have strong edges where I want the viewer's eye to go, where the center of interest is. I want the lightest light and the darkest dark, the most color, the brightest color, the most detail. Did that answer your question? So what I'm doing is looking at the contrast first.
Okay, yeah, I got that.
Okay, good. Well, that's the main thing, and that's how I sorted this, was looking at the contrast or the values. So, let's see, I want to get more color in this orange. I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. So what I want to do is find pastels, and when I do this, sometimes I'll pick up 3 or 4. These are all from the same, and it's like my light mid-tones, okay? And I'm going to test them to see if they're close See, that one has an edge. All of these do. Let me go to the next value. I want more color. There's that. Now that one is more intense, but I don't see an edge. And that's the only thing that'll throw you is the intensity. Sometimes you don't see an edge, but the color jumps out at you. So I'm going to use this one and bring in some more color. Is this making sense? Now, if I have a shadow, I got that from the light, the mid-tone darks. I'm going to go to my complement. This is pretty vivid. I'd like a grayer here. And I want to put it down next to that and see if there is an edge there. Gorgeous. Okay, so in the shadow areas, I'm coming in with my complement at the same value, but I want to keep it dominant warm, so let's find some more warms here. So if I think it's too red, I can come in, but it have to be similar in value. So I'm not limited to the local color. This is probably going to look like an Easter egg, but I want you to see how you can push the color brighter if you want, or you can keep it closer together, but you're not stuck with the local color. And any color should work in here. And I can work back and forth depending on the tooth of the paper. So, I can hardly tell what that is. I can't tell what that is. So I have 6 different hues in that rock face. This is a hard pastel, and I like to use the hard pastels to draw and to blend and to feather. Do you know what feathering is? Yes, some of you do. A thin layer. I like to use fine charcoal for that too. If something's too bright or a distant mountain that's popping too much, I do fine charcoal. It's gray, but it's transparent. and it pushes things back. And it also, it's the same thing I do with oil paint. I use glazes. So the feathering is like a glaze. You can add a color, or you can make it duller or darker, a little bit darker. Well, I'm enjoying that. Pat yourself on the back when you do something you like. I'm going back to my initial worms here for the ground, and maybe even some of this red brown. To me, that's about the color of the sage. So I've got my dark blue underneath, and I'm coming in with this warm red-brown. Kind of like, looks like cad red light, maybe, at a mid-tone. And then if I decide, no, that's too warm, I want it to be in shadow. So these complements will dull, but they also add interest. Principle of the red underneath the green landscape.
Adds life to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see what's underneath, and it adds excitement. And the other thing that's fun, and I like to use the real soft pastels at the end, because to me it's like putting a alla prima stroke of paint on there. And I use the pastels if they're soft and round, like the Schminke and the Sennelier. Let's pretend there's flowers on here. I like to roll them. Sometimes there's sunlight hitting. I don't know if this is going to make sense here, but you know, we've got these grasses now. Every day, every time I go out to walk, it's like they're a different color. So you can, in the winter trees, when it's low light and it hits the sunlight at the end of the day, hits the top of those deciduous trees, and it's like pinkish orange. And you can go in with some pretty intense color on those. Just because they're like gray trees doesn't mean you have to paint them that way. The effect of the light makes much more impact than the local color. So I can get as detailed as I want, but if I don't have that initial structure, it's like building a house and not having a solid foundation. And it seems like that foundation takes a long time, but if you don't do it right, you know, if you don't have something underneath. So for me, that's making sure I've got a warm dominance and a light. I want a light dominance. I'm going to go with this beautiful grayish purple back here. So now I'm adding the spice colors. I guess I need to look at that thing and see. Let's see what it says. It's phthalo green and red violet. Magenta, my favorite. Those are the spice colors. So let me find a phthalo green, which could be that. That's close. And magenta. So I put the magenta in at a dark value. And I don't want to get too much. Too much pepper is not good. And if you probably know that I keep things pretty much realistic. And this is a little more expressionistic than I'm used to, but we'll go with it. I'm going back to my initial blues and yellow, warm yellows back here. I want more of a transition in the sky here. This is what I saw outside as I walked in. Sun today, snow tomorrow. That's wispy clouds.
I find it very interesting about you working from your other paintings rather than a photographic material. And perhaps that is possible why you're getting removed from what was there, but the painting becomes more expressionistic
Yeah.
in its.
And I do work from photos sometimes. Usually I'll photograph before I start painting, and then I'll run a copy and I'll work from it. What I found is switching mediums or doing a painting from a painting, I have more of a connection to the scene, what I saw in the beginning, and it also allows me more freedom to, because as I paint, often I intuition goes, I wonder what it would be if I put purple in here, or if I made that second mountain bigger. I mean, I've painted it the way I saw it with its kind of frame in frame, big cliffs, but now it's like I want to see the next step, and what happens is you have series. So I can have a series of Diablo Canyon paintings, and they sort of roll off after a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what I found with, and I worked in watercolor, I studio painted from photos. They look like photos. If you're good at doing that, they're going to look like photos.
Yeah.
And photos lie. And it's much more of a challenge to go out and paint from nature. But you gain so much information that you could never see in a photo.
Yeah.
Daniel Green said about portrait painting, you cannot learn to paint a portrait from photos. But once you've painted from life, you can work from photos. And I found that to be true with almost anything. You know, it's like you don't want to remove it one step and then go to a flat two-dimensional photo, which makes the values extreme, and expect it to be, you know, and we're all good at what we do, and I'm not saying that any of it's wrong. I don't think there's anything you can do that's wrong. And it's more what works for you and what's exciting to you. If I'm just got a formula and I just repeat myself, it's easier maybe, but it's also boring, and it's going to show in my work. Yes.
So this series that you're working on,
from the canyon?
Yeah.
Is it all gonna be in pastel, or are you also gonna use oil paint?
I've done it in oils, I've done it in watercolor or acrylic. My classes are water media, so I either do watercolor or acrylic or both. The first class, or the second class, I do pastel, and the third class, I do regular oils, and the fourth is water-based oil. So, but the students work in whatever they want to work in.
Will you be showing this series anywhere?
Well, yes. I don't know where yet,
Let us know.
but I'm getting my show ready. Congratulations. Shows are good mainly to kind of like have a goal.
Do you find a difference between the oils and the water-based oils?
Yes. Yes. Surprisingly. So each medium has its own challenges and its own benefits and kind of lends itself one way or the other. And I love to, Alex Powers, when I was painting in watercolor, I don't know if you know him, but he did critiques and he said, oh, it's obvious you can do a lot of things. He said, I wouldn't advise it. Said, but if you do, work in series and show them separately, show them together as a body. So, but I found like pastel and oil are so perfect together. And I learned a lot about what's possible in color by using pastel. And I learned how to work with pastels to mix. Whether you need to or not, it could be fun to have I've got several colors on this dark hill and it's exciting, same thing there. I don't know, time-wise, it's 11:30.
Which do you like better, the real oils or the water-based oils?
I like the real oils better, but I'm learning to like the water-based. My problem with water-based is it's a soy base, and it dries kind of matte and kind of later. And so then I had to find the darkest pigments in water-based, because what I like about oils is that rich dark. Those yummy transparent darks. And it's not as transparent, but I'm learning to end this. I did a demo last Wednesday that I really like, and it was dominant darks. So, but they do dry lighter, and sometimes now when Holbein came out with water base, it would dry milky looking. And I learned that you have to use water-soluble linseed oil. That was the only thing available. Now I've learned I have to use a quick dry medium, because otherwise it's tacky forever. And it works great for printmaking, for the soy-based print oils, but I don't want tacky oil paintings. So that's my experience. I don't know.
And how do you like watercolor as compared to oils?
I loved watercolor, and
You use the past tense.
I don't work in it a lot anymore.
Okay.
Watercolor looks so wonderfully immediate, loose, and free, but it's so deliberate. And I decided I wanted to work in one medium, and at that time, this was in the 80s, I was studying with a watercolor teacher, so I stayed with watercolor until I got good, till I felt like I could paint with it and get what I wanted. 14 years later, I realized that this is a challenge, and I love it when I paint in watercolor, but I'm not as, it's almost like a piano player. You've got to do the scales every day, or you get, rusty. So I'm just kind of rusty with watercolor, but I often begin and this is a lot like a watercolor in the sense of I'm putting big areas, thin paint, I do thin fat over lean, and I do thin with oil paints. My beginning oil painting looks a lot like a watercolor. So I think once a watercolor painter always, but oil and pastel are opaque. I start with my darks. Watercolor and acrylic, I start with my lights, usually. And so it's a different process, and it's kind of sometimes mind-bending to switch back and forth. But I like them all for different reasons. Acrylic now, my gosh, you can get layering, collaging. I mean, it's like, look at the mediums in acrylic. You can have fibers in it and sand in it, and, you know. And the same thing with pastel. If I thought I was getting better paintings by using, there's acrylic pastel ground. And you can paint it on anything you want to and do that. Oh, I wanted to show you this, and I, of course, forgot. I use liquid gloves, except for when I forget to use it, to protect my hands. And I just can't do the vinyl latex glove thing. It gets in my way. And this, and I'm hoping it's still available. I got it at one of those, Art Expo or something. It's called Final Fix, and you can frame without glass. Pastels. And so in this little book, that was one reason. This first one, if you're interested, you can come up, and does not rub. Doesn't rub off.
Does it change the color?
It didn't change the color. The fixative I use that I think doesn't change the color, unfortunately, is more expensive, but the Lascal and they're both put out by Sennelier, and somehow they don't change the color. But there's a pastel painter that comes to class that is using a technique that Daniel Green used years ago. It's in his book, where you put the pastel on, you spray it heavily and let it darken, and then you paint back into it. So in a way, it's like putting an underpainting and then building it out. So you would get more of that transparency, because each layer, you spray it, it darkens, you lighten it. So that's another way to work with it. But I've mostly done just one shot, take out the paper and paint. And that's the reason I like to use the colored, the background colors, is that I don't have to go edge to edge. I can just, in painting plein air, I go to the center of interest first, because you may not get another chance. They may run you off, or
Or a storm comes.
or the tornado comes through. You never know. So you could drop. Oh, don't remind me. Yeah, you don't want to do 200 pickup. That's about how much is in this box. You don't have to have a whole stick. You can have a small amount and get about 200 colors in that. Now I have a bigger one at home. And then I have luscious boxed set. So, yes, go ahead.
You have so much experience with these different, working in different media, and I wonder why, because we're all pastel people, why is oil pastel such a stepchild? I mean, there's no shows for it, pastel shows will not allow oil pastel. Do you ever play with oil pastel?
I have. And the thing about oil pastel, and according to whoever Sennelier I talked to said it's the least toxic. But it is like watercolor and acrylic. You start light and build to your darks. And also, and there's one artist, and you can scratch through it, it's wax and oil in with the pigment. So, and I think there's actually more. In fact, I saw some flyer artisans about oil pastel, and there's more interest. And Sennelier's putting out fat oil pastels now if you want to work large in it. But to me, it was more of a kind of intimate, like watercolor, layering. You know, it's a more deliberate, more process-oriented. Reminded me of printmaking. Would drive me crazy. Well, first you do this, and then you do this, and then you do that. And you acid wash it for 3 minutes. And I mean, and if you like that, I'm more of a spontaneous, I just want
You surely can't do anything the way you do it with soft pastel and oil pastel, but I
Pretty much
noticed that
not.
most oil pastel work appears in the realm of drawing, or it's graphic kind of work, you know.
That's possibly more, but to me, and now, when I started, you never entered watercolor in a show that had oil paintings because they faded into the walls, right? It's not that way now. And to separate it, that's my whole theory, is don't separate it by medium, separate it by what you do and what works for you. That's how I see it. And then find the show. You can definitely put it in a mixed media show. You know, so, or organize a show for oil pastel. But it's very different. Each medium has its thing.
So when you present your paintings in your next show, say,
Yes,
are you going to put glass on?
that's a good question. Well, and I went to an Evelyn Bourne watercolor exhibit 2 years ago, before COVID. And I swear she had watercolors with no glass.
Yeah.
I swear.
Sure.
And because you can, and she even had a large, and I think it was on canvas, but you can get acrylic watercolor ground that makes the canvas like watercolor paper and paint on that. But you would have to have something like this vinyl fix, I would think, on it. But she had done there was a whole wall of 10 by 10s, gorgeous pieces, but there were 2 or 3 that I'm going, those are watercolor.
Yeah, one of the most well-known people who works in both oil and watercolor and shows them together, and you can hardly tell the difference because she does present the watercolors you know, as a painting and with no glass, and that's Evelyn Bourne. I don't know if you know. Oh, is that what you just said?
That's what I was just saying, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, yeah, her work is so exciting, very exciting.
Yeah.
I don't know how what do you think she does with that?
I wish I knew.
That watercolor was more like diluted acrylic, it seems.
Yeah, it could have been that those were acrylic, because you can get, I think it's the golden 100 GAC that makes your acrylics like watercolor. It could be that too.
Her work's at Acosta Strong at the foot of Canyon Road, so
Yeah.
make sure if you're in Santa Fe, coming to my show, stop there to see her work. It's just dynamic.
I agree. Any questions, anything? You've been a wonderful audience. I don't know if it's too early.
You're a wonderful.
Great demonstration.
Thank you.